الرحيم
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. And welcome to Islamic Oasis podcast. Although this is not live, this is a discussion we are having with our brother Jake. Many of you know who brother Jake is, Hafidhullah, and also our brother Daniel, Haqiqatjou. Dear brothers and sisters, as you know, since the war started in Gaza, October 7th, it has been, in every way, painful images coming out of Palestine in general, the genocide that is occurring, the way the Zionists are behaving, the role of Israel state as a whole, the role of the media in the West, and the support of the Western countries to all-out genocide taking place in the heart of the Muslims. And on the top of that, the role of the rulers in making sure, or in many ways, the enablers of what is happening. We have been, as you also know, and Islamic Oasis has been very much involved in aid work, humanitarian work on the ground in Gaza since the day it began. And that's a whole different discussion that we can also have, maybe part of this discussion here. So, inshallah, to discuss all of these events, we were able to bring our brother Jake and brother Daniel to see where is this going. What is the response of the Muslims? What should be the response of the Muslims? And the role of the media, especially the Western media, in trying to silence anyone that is speaking on these matters. So, inshallah, let's begin this conversation. If we can bring in brother Daniel also, inshallah. Hi, brother Daniel. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Let me begin here this conversation, inshallah, with our brother Jake here. Brother Jake, you have done a lot of lectures. You speak a lot on, in general, you have an audience that is through your discussion very much aware of the kind of tricks, intellectual tricks and both media tricks that are played in when we have these discussions, especially whether it's Zionist or anything else. Since October 7th, how has this changed? What are your discussions like? What is important that we bring it out in the media and especially the Muslim audience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. I think, it's obvious to anybody who's paying attention to what's going on. Any sort of criticism of the Zionist state of so-called Israel, people are going to attempt to silence you. Many of my videos on YouTube actually have been flagged. On my own personal YouTube channel, I primarily, before October 7th, focused on matters of theology, refuting atheists, Christians, secularists, and so on. But since October 7th, seeing the amount of lies and distortions and media manipulation that's been going on, I've been focusing a lot on Zionism and more broadly Judaism to combat the lies that they've been spreading. Now, fortunately, alhamdulillah, with the advancements in social media, I think we are seeing a lot of of course, not everybody, but a lot of common people here in the West are waking up to uh, the reality of what Israel has been doing, not only since October the 7th, but it's prompting them to look more into the history, see, well, what actually led up to October the 7th? What happened before this? What have the Palestinian people been dealing with for 75 plus years? So I think that has been, if we can say anything good that's come out of this, is the awareness that's being raised, not only on my channel. Brother Daniel's been doing stuff on his channel and posting a lot on his website and Twitter and stuff like that. So I think that the advancements in social media has allowed us to expose more of the distortions that these people are coming with. But it works both ways, because now they're able to spread their lies and get them out quicker to people, let them reach more people. And so we have to, inshallah, do our part in combating them.
Brother Daniel, I mean, it looks like you're being targeted. There's a lot going on your end. What's the deal, Sheikhi? Why are the Zionists so scared about this whole situation? I mean, if they were on the right side of history, they wouldn't have to silence people. They wouldn't have to target people and try to shut them down. Rather, they should have a good enough response if they had the truth on their side.
Yeah, it's shocking. So I was recently targeted by the ADL, which is called the Anti-Defamation League. And they are supposed to be focused on fighting discrimination, but really it's just a Zionist front. They attack critics of Zionism. And I was really surprised that they put out a hit piece against me, because usually their targets are very high profile. So if you're following the news, you might have seen that the ADL was targeting Elon Musk because they claimed that he wasn't doing enough to fight anti-Semitism and bigotry on Twitter when he bought Twitter. So he's the head of the CEO of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, is meeting with Elon Musk and pressuring him. And then to go from that to, tweeting about me and writing a hit piece against me, it seems like a big gap. Or why would they target me? So I do think that they are very sensitive. They're seeing that more and more people are waking up. More and more people are seeing the reality, what is really behind the lies. People are less reliant on the mainstream media, which oftentimes has been bought by Zionists and controlled by Zionists. Now there are alternative media sources. And so this is since October 7th, it's been an unprecedented destruction of Israel's reputation in the world, not only in the US, but in Europe, Asia, throughout the entire globe. And they really don't know how to respond. The type of response that they have historically had is to just shout anti-Semitism, to also claim that Jews are the biggest victims of genocide because of World War II. But those kinds of accusations now ring hollow, because people are seeing these images of an actual genocide taking place before their eyes in high definition video on Twitter and on TikTok and other social media. And it seems very callous. It seems very hearted to say, "Oh, you shouldn't criticize this because that means you're a hateful bigot." Like no one is buying that kind of line anymore. And so this is making them panic and freak out. And so they'll criticize different people like me. And I think what makes my critique of Israel different and Zionism different is that I focus on Judaism. What is found within the Jewish religious texts that will justify this kind of behavior by the only Jewish state? in the world, which is so-called Israel. So this is very sensitive for them for some reason, and I don't know why. Why criticizing the Talmud because it has passages that are genocidal and very racist? This is within their most holy books. Racism, the promotion of genocide, the promotion of apartheid, and very harsh discrimination against non-Jews. This is found in their books. Now, not all Jews are religious. Not all Jews accept those books. And I always disclaimer everything that I say, that when we criticize Judaism, that doesn't mean that all Jews accept genocide and apartheid, etc. So how can I be anti-Semitic? But what's interesting about that is the Zionist industry has spent 20 years basically generating so much hatred against Muslims by criticizing Islam and saying, oh, in Islam, they believe in this hadith or they believe in this verse of the Quran that's violent and it's intolerant. And so they have a literal Islamophobic industry created to generate hatred amongst Americans and Westerners against Islam and against Muslims by criticizing our religious texts, the Quran and the Sunnah. But now when we flip the tables or turn the tables and we're looking at the Jewish religious texts, we're saying, okay, what about this passage of the Torah, the Hebrew Bible? What about this passage within the Talmud, which you think is, the oral law given to Moses by God on Mount Sinai, and it's saying that black people are inferior, for example. Why can't we criticize that? Like, why can't we in a very academic, objective way look at those passages and try to understand them? And it's related, it's connected to Israel's actual genocidal behavior and the decisions that they make. People wonder, like, how can Israel just like the recent news, Israel killed 7 aid workers. Right. And these were aid workers that are coming from the UK, they're coming from America, Australia. And Israel targeted them deliberately, killed them, bombed them, drone strike them. And then you see on these Telegram channels online, a lot of Israelis are celebrating, a lot of Zionists are celebrating the death and making jokes about these aid workers that have been murdered. And so you might think, what justifies that type of cruelty or that kind of hatred for human life? But it goes back to the religious text and the teachings that many Jewish radicals actually adopt. Not all Jews, but these Jewish radicals, where they are taught that non-Jews who oppose the Jewish people are Amalek. And maybe we can talk more about this concept of Amalek, but it comes from the Bible, and it refers to the enemies of the Jews. That's how it's been interpreted. But in the Bible, Amalek refers to a specific people that were believed to have attacked the Jewish race or the Jewish people historically at one point in time. And then allegedly God tells the Jewish people that you have to blot out Amalek. You basically have to genocide them, kill their men, women, and children because of what they did to you as an act of revenge, and never forget what they did to you. And now you have Benjamin Netanyahu, you have members of the Israeli Knesset, their parliament, you have other Zionists that are invoking Amalek. They're saying Amalek, Palestinians are Amalek. Don't forget Amalek. So this is invoking genocide, and it's a state of mind because if you go to Jake's channel, for example, he has some videos of what they teach in some of these Jewish schools and yeshivas in Israel. And they're actually radicalizing the children there from a young age to have this kind of intense genocidal hatred towards non-Jews. So if you're raised in that kind of environment, then it's no surprise that we see this kind of callousness or this support for genocide coming out of that country.
Can I comment?
Yeah, just this conversation.
It's interesting because I'll bring this up too. If the audience is familiar, Daniel and I appeared on a podcast actually shortly before October the 7th, towards the end of September. We were on the PBD podcast and we were discussing with these Christians, and I brought up the passage of 1 Samuel 15:3. And they basically, many Christians later who watched it, people were mocking And their retort was, oh, but this is the Old Testament. And, even the Jews have reformed, and they're not really utilizing these passages. And then, subhanAllah, unfortunately, October the 7th happened just a few weeks later, Daniel. And then we see Netanyahu, the prime minister of so-called Israel, is actually using some of those very passages, or basically referencing them, to call the Palestinian people Amalek. So I just wanted to see if you could comment on that, because it was interesting to me that it just so happened we appeared on this large podcast and we're bringing up these passages in criticism of Judaism and, by extension, Christianity, because if you believe Jesus is God, then he is responsible for revealing those passages in the Old Testament. But yet Christianity is supposedly all about love, and God is loved, and he came to die for our sins and all this. But yet in the Old Testament, he is ordering the killing of innocent children and even infants. So I just wanted to see if you thought of that, because, wow, to me, Qadarullah, that this happens a couple weeks later, and then a couple months later, short time after this, Netanyahu in real time is actually referring to those very same passages to basically to justify the genocide that's being carried out on the Palestinian people. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, but I thought that was interesting connection there.
Definitely. What has really happened since October 7th is all of these double standards have been exposed. All of these double standards against Muslims have been exposed. And one of these double standards is that they claim that both Jews and Christian apologists have claimed that really the difference between Muslims and Jews and Christians is that Muslims take their books seriously. So when in Islam, in the Quran and Hadith, we read about jihad, we read about warfare, we read about corporal punishment when it comes to certain kinds of crimes, that Muslims actually care about the Quran, they care about revelation, and they'll implement that, and they'll strive to have implementation through a proper Sharia state, a khilafah. So Muslims have those kinds of aspirations, but Jews and Christians, they don't care about what the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible says or what the Talmud says. That's the apologetic that they use to demonize Muslims and pretend like they're innocent of the things that are mentioned in their books. And the things that are mentioned in their books, by the way, in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, is way beyond what Islam says, because Islam doesn't allow, even in war, the killing of women and children and infants. That's not found anywhere in Islam, but that's something that literally the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible is commanding. God is commanding this specifically in the land of Israel, because the land of Israel is an inheritance for the Jews. God has given it as an inheritance. So anyone that usurps the inheritance is to be killed, and that includes women and children and infants and even animals and livestock. So they say that, we are not implementing this. We don't have this kind of dogmatic, genocidal type of adherence to our books like Muslims do. But that has been proven to be an absolute lie. They do abide by it. They are implementing it. They are executing it, as we see on our screens, on our phones, every single day, with atrocity after atrocity after atrocity. So we see the commandments found in the Torah are actually being implemented to the letter by these Jewish extremists, these Jewish radicals. They claim that Muslims are radicals, and this is actually a video that I did. Ben Shapiro claimed that the majority of Muslims in the world are actually radical, extremist supporters of terrorism. And how did he justify this? He made a video on YouTube. It has over 4 million views. Ben Shapiro claims that, Muslims believe in the Quran. Muslims believe in Sharia law. Muslims believe in these texts, these religious scriptures. Therefore, if they believe in these religious scriptures, then that means that they have to support terrorism. They have to support this kind of intolerance and genocide, etc. Of course, what he said is completely false on the basis of Islam rejects terrorism, and we denounce all kinds of terrorism. But look at the argument, look at the logic. He's saying, well, if you support the books, if you believe in the books of your religion, and and these books include violence, that means you're a terrorist. So let's apply the same standard. Let's apply the same logic. Jews believe in, many Jews, not all, believe in these books. They believe in the Bible. They believe in the Talmud. They believe in the Midrash. They believe in these texts, and these texts have very problematic beliefs, not just problematic from a secular perspective, but problematic from like a human perspective. Like, who agrees that it's allowed or acceptable morally to genocide or kill women and children and infants? No one accepts that, regardless of if you're Muslim or not. But these things are found in their book. So if we use Ben Shapiro's logic and the criticism that he has made against Muslims to say the majority of Muslims are radical extremist supporters of terrorism, if we apply the same logic, then it applies even more so to Jews and even to Christians, according to that logic. But he obviously would not admit that, and that kind of double standard is used. If we start making this argument, then we're labeled by like the ADL and other Zionist groups as anti-Semites, as bigots. But Ben Shapiro can have his career and he can have his platform, and no one accuses him of bigotry or Islamophobia, etc., and deplatform him.
Sheikh, this is both of you guys here. Do you think it's a strategy to somehow separate Zionism from Judaism? Is there an actual separation between the two? Right? And if it is, what or is it just a strategy to keep Judaism out of it? I mean, although from what I'm hearing from the last few minutes, whatever it is that the Zionists are doing is found in their book. Mm-hmm. So where does Zionism come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was actually going to bring this up. So I don't really know Daniel's opinion, and what I'm about to say, it may be somewhat controversial, or some Muslims may be skeptical of it. No pun intended. We're with the Muslim skeptic here, but I'm sure that many Muslims have seen these different so-called anti-Zionist rabbis that have appeared on Muslim podcasts and different platforms, or you see them at rallies for Palestine. And I'm not saying that none of them are genuine, that they may have genuine support for the Palestinian people and are appalled by the oppression and everything that they're seeing. So I want to make that clear from the outset. I'm not saying that all Jews are dishonest and don't actually have genuine support for the Palestinian people. But one thing that, and I made a video about this on my channel in some detail, and we're actually probably going to talk about it this weekend here at the center, is that I find some of these anti-Zionist rabbis, or so-called anti-Zionist rabbis, who come on these Muslim platforms, to be quite frank, as dishonest, or not really telling the full picture. Now, why is that? Because some people may be wondering, some Muslims in the audience, well, Brother Jake, why are some rabbis Zionists today and supporting the Zionist state of Israel? And why are some anti-Zionist? Well, many times I see these rabbis speak in generalities and speak very vaguely. They'll say, Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. They're completely opposed to one another. They basically make takfir of the Zionists and say, yeah, they've got really nothing to do with the religion. They've hijacked the religion. This is started by secularists, which is partly true, that the modern Zionist movement was largely founded and put forward by people like Theodor Herzl. There's no really denying that whatsoever. But if we put aside these so-called Jewish actors, and I want to talk about that maybe, which is another controversy. Maybe we could talk about this concept of Jewishness as a race. And maybe that's something that we can address later. But these so-called Zionist rabbis, anti-Zionist rabbis, right? I never see them, and I'd be happy to be corrected, and I put a video about this. I never really see them going into detail and explaining from the Zionist rabbi perspective as to what texts they are using from their religious tradition to support their claims, to support their Zionist agenda. In other words, I'm not supporting their interpretation. I'm not here to say that the Zionists are actually more faithful to the text. I'm not even going that far yet. I'm just saying, why are the anti-Zionist rabbis, why are they not bringing up the texts that the Zionist rabbis would appeal to? And the so-called religious Jews, forget about the secular ones that don't even believe in the book, they don't even believe in God, forget about them. The ones that claim, at least they claim to be religious, they claim to be Orthodox Jews, like Ben Shapiro and these other people. I mean, he's not a rabbi, but actual rabbis and scholars of Judaism. Why are the anti-Zionist rabbis not bringing up the texts that they would appeal to, explaining it to the Muslim audience, and then explaining from their perspective in detail, giving a detailed refutation of why they are wrong, why their interpretation of the Jewish text is incorrect? I don't really see that done, and that's leads me to actually be skeptical of these so-called anti-Zionist rabbis. Now, my own research, and Daniel might have, this is not rehearsed, so he may disagree with me, and that's fine. But my own research shows that this is actually a legitimate debate that goes back to all the way back. It's not this thing that Theodor Herzl dreamed up, 100 or so years ago. No, it actually goes back to rabbinical authorities. So some people may be familiar with the figure of Maimonides. Daniel has spoken about him. He's a well-known Jewish scholar, really no doubt about it. But there's a slightly lesser-known figure who's called Nachmanides. And he came about 100 or so years after Maimonides. Now, Maimonides has a text which he details the so-called religious obligations, the commandments, sometimes referred to as the 614 commandments that are from the Torah. And he lists all of them, or what he perceives to be all of the positive commandments from God from the Torah. But he conspicuously leaves out the obligation for Jews to occupy the land of Israel by force, and then after that, which goes on to, there's a later discussion about this, after they occupy the land, then they have to basically try to occupy what they call Greater Israel. It's not just Gaza or what we would call Palestine today. They have a more expansive agenda to occupy other areas. But their immediate requirement or commandment from God is to occupy what we would call Palestine today. Now, Maimonides conspicuously leaves out this obligation. Now, Nachmanides comes about 100 or so years later and actually has a refutation of Maimonides and goes into detail explaining why he's wrong for leaving this out as a positive commandment from God. And he says it's a religious obligation upon every single Jew to move to Israel and to establish themselves in the land, right? And then for this further actual violent expansion from there. So he actually wrote a refutation of him. And Nachmanides is not like your neighbor John from down the street. He's not a nobody. In the Islamic tradition, and of course, I'm not comparing our scholars to them because we believe that they were standing for the truth. But just so that people understand who may not be familiar with these names, it would be like a dispute between Imam Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah, right? Two giants in the tradition. It would be like a ikhtilaf or dispute between these two scholars. This is what I'm seeing that you have in the Jewish tradition. Now, I'm not saying that Nachmanides is correct. I think there's an argument to be made there, but that's a further discussion. And I'm not saying that Maimonides is necessarily correct. I'm just saying that these positions and Nachmanides' position of Zionism actually is going back 1,000+ years, right? It's not just some creation by purely by secularists and Theodor Herzl. Now, it's interesting because many secular Jews will appeal to Theodor Herzl and they'll call him the father of Israel. You've probably heard this, and they view him as like a hero. But the rabbinical authorities of the 20th and 21st century, who at least claim to be religious, will actually appeal to Nachmanides. So there's a very, one of the most popular and influential Zionist rabbis of the 20th century is a guy by the name of Rabbi Kook. And he explicitly, and I'm going to detail this in the talk, he explicitly refers and quotes Nachmanides for his position and his refutation of Maimonides to say that, look, Zionism is actually supported by Judaism and the sages and the religious texts and so on and so forth. So Rabbi Kook is looking back to Nachmanides, quotes these passages that I would refer to from his primary sources, and he calls him the first Zionist and the father of Zionism and the father of Israel. So Rabbi Kook and these religious rabbis who are Zionists do not refer to Theodor Herzl for inspiration. They're not referring to these people who don't even believe in God and don't believe in the religious texts. They're referring back to religious authorities like Nachmanides. I know that's been a long-winded explanation, but I hope that it benefits the audience. The whole point that I'm trying to say here is that at the very least, this seems to me to be a legitimate religious dispute between the rabbis and the sages that goes back thousands of years. And as I said, at the very least, you can say that this is a legitimate opinion of holding to Zionism amongst the rabbis. And I think that it's unfortunate that this is not explained actually in detail by some of these so-called anti-Zionist rabbis. Why are they not explaining Nachmanides' opinion, Rabbi Kook's utilization of his text, and what he says, and then, if they think he's wrong, attempting to, in detail, refute him in public so that Muslims can actually be, educated on these things. So anyway, that's my 2 cents, Daniel. I don't know if you agree or you have any comments on that whatsoever.
My understanding, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the rabbis and the sages, they don't have a disagreement about the commandment to cleanse Israel as defined, as the greater Israel, which actually expands beyond, the current supposed borders. So I believe that Maimonides does talk about like Milchamet Mitzvah versus Milchamet Reshut, which is the obligatory war. Mm-hmm. Obligatory war meaning it's obligatory for Jews to take Palestine and cleanse, or Israel and cleanse it. I believe Maimonides has that position. I think that the disagreement, and when you see and I had a recent conversation with a religious Jewish scholar named David on my channel, and he made a couple of interesting distinctions. He is distinguishing between Jews who oppose Zionism for religious reasons and Jews who oppose Zionism for humanitarian reasons. And he falls in the latter category. They oppose Zionism because they say Israel is committing war crimes, and the way that Israel created was basically an ethnic cleansing. And they oppose Zionism for humanitarian reasons. And there are many Jews who fall into that category. And those are the ones that Muslims can have, most in common with and meet with and talk with and etc. But there are this other category of those Jews who oppose Zionism for religious reasons. And so what is the religious dispute here? Because you have religious Jews who support Zionism and religious Jews who oppose Zionism for religious reasons. And the dispute is, well, is it allowed for Jews to go and take over Israel, the promised land, with the Messiah or before the Messiah? So they believe in the Messiah, the King Messiah, who's supposed to be along the same descent as David, King David, and he is going to come and basically take over the world and put the entire world under Jewish rule and under the commandments of God. So the dispute is that, well, when the Messiah comes, then he will, and there are certain conditions for when the Messiah comes. But when he comes, then he'll take over the temple, or he'll reconstruct the temple, he'll take over the Temple Mount, and he will basically control Greater Israel and then the entire world. And it's not allowed for Jews to take over the promised land before the Messiah shows up. So they believe that eventually, that land will be overtaken by the Messiah, and the entire world will be made to submit to the Messiah, and the Messiah will destroy all idolatry, and he'll also destroy all religions, so that it's only Judaism that people can practice, or the 7 Noahide laws, if they don't accept Judaism. But the Zionist Jews say, no, we are going to take over Israel, and then the Messiah will come afterwards. So we don't have to wait for the Messiah. That's the religious dispute. And some of the rabbis that come on to Muslim programs or discuss with Muslims, they fall into that category where they still believe in all of these things, like the taking over of Greater Israel, the building of the third temple, etc. Their only disagreement is with the timeline. Like what is the order of events? Does the Messiah come first and then we take over, or we take over first and then the Messiah? But the humanitarian Jews, they're a separate category.
Brothers, both. Also, the question for both here. The British, obviously, the formation of Israel in 1948, support for forming Israel from 1917 to the Balfour Declaration to the British Mandate and all of these, Sykes and Picot. Let me ask you guys this: what is the need for Britain to? In some ways, it looks like they pushed Zionism in many ways to achieve their end. I mean, can I say, would that be an accurate statement, or is that no? The Jews or the Zionists wanted to get this done, and they've used the British to accomplish their goal. But obviously, it worked in the favor of the British at the time, and now it's working in the favor of the Americans. Even though both the British and the Americans are both obviously they're Christians, and we know what the Jewish belief is regarding Isa alayhi salam and all of this. But it seems like they've always kept that aside and looked at the political goals in order to achieve this. So how do you guys look at this issue, that the usage of Zionism and Zionists in order to achieve, in some ways, their political goals in the Muslim world?
Yeah, you can go ahead, Dana.
Sure. So what is the motivation of America, for example? What is the motivation of the British Empire to help with Zionism? I think just in dunyawi terms, it's just money. It's a lot of money that is being funneled into into the pockets of these politicians, and that's why people who are supposedly Christian or supposedly atheist and secular can nonetheless support a religious cause of Zionism or the establishment of the state of Israel because God promised it to the Jews. Like, that's, I think, the immediate explanation of it. But is there a deeper force? Is there a deeper hatred of Muslims and wanting to break up the Muslim world and weaken the Muslim world by taking the heart of the Muslim world, which is Palestine, and turning it into a Zionist state? Yeah, there is that larger goal as well. And it's no secret that these colonial powers have long harbored a hatred for Muslims, and they want to destroy the Khilafah. They want to destroy the unity of the Muslims for the purpose of keeping Muslims divided so that they don't form the superpower that they once were. The superpower where Muslims were dominant economically and politically in the world. That's something that is the nightmare for the West. It's the nightmare for Europeans, and they want to attack that, and they do that through destroying the Khilafah and on an ongoing basis preventing the formation of the Khilafah. That's why we see, like, most of the effort to demonize the Khilafah is coming from Zionists, but also some Christians and some atheists. Like, they're united. These three strands, and then also Hindus have now more recently come on board because they all see Islam as a common enemy, and this is why they have demonized political Islam. Notice how if you talk about political Hinduism, no problem, it's not considered extremism. If you talk about like Hindutva, basically, or the BJP, it's allowed. You can be openly associated with Hindu nationalism in the US, and you can operate, etc. You can openly, and then obviously you can operate freely, and you're even promoted if you promote Jewish nationalism, which is Zionism. That is also allowed and promoted. But if you start talking about Islamic nationalism in the sense of Khilafah, or Muslim nationalism, Muslim national identity, then you're labeled an Islamist, and you will face problems being branded as an extremist and a radical. Well, why is that? And also, I mean, Christian nationalism too now has been labeled as extremism as well. If you talk about Christianity being the religion of the state, it's also seen as extremist. So why are some religions allowed to be political but not other religions? What is the source of this double standard? But Muslims have been the main target because our religion is very clear. Islam is very clear on the necessity of governance, on the necessity of khilafah. But this is viewed as very dangerous. They demonize it, and they even ban it in certain countries because they don't want this to reemerge, for Muslims to rise up and establish a khilafah. They view that as their biggest, as the biggest threat that they face.
Any comments on this, Sheikh?
No, I mean, I would just reiterate the same points that he made. So,
Sheikh, I mean, is this when we're talking about, the other day Yasser Qadi had a point. Look, you're talking about any step that, in general, the West has made, whether it's Europeans or the Americans in general, they're doing everything they can to, prevent the formation of the Khilafah. I'm sure you've heard the latest lecture that was given by Yasser Qadi, saying that the idea of the Khilafah is not even in his mind. It doesn't even come in the 20 priorities that if he had to write them down, it wouldn't even be in the 20th of those priorities. So, Sheikh, I mean, has war in Gaza exposed exposed and it's exposing more and more supposed Islamic scholars who claim to be Islamic scholars, but they don't want Islamic law. Do we see something like that within the Zionism, within Zionism or within the Jews? Is this something that you guys, from when you were studying these things. Do you see that? I mean, is this kind of hypocrisy amongst the Yahud and what you're seeing amongst the Muslims?
I think definitely. I mean, Sheikh, you mentioned this lecture by Yasser Qadhi, but he also recently had a discussion with this other guy, Mustafa Akil, who, I mean, honestly, if you watched it, if you studied Islam, even on a surface level, and you watched it and you didn't know who these people were, you wouldn't really know. You would be questioning: are these two Muslims debating? Are these actually two Muslims having a discussion? I mean, it was completely ridiculous. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but it was like two zindiqs having a discussion with trying to sprinkle in some Islamic terminology or once in a while making a remark here and there. So, yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the things that's happened is that people like these individuals who claim to be scholars or even students of knowledge or whatever they claim to be, they expose themselves as frauds. I see that very clearly happening. And yeah, I mean, I think you have the same thing happening in Judaism amongst different rabbis, but we can say even more problematic when it's our own people, supposed to be our own people, supposed to be our own leaders, or people who are claiming to be leaders or intellectuals in the community are having these positions. I mean, we had, and I made a video on this, also on the same person, and it's not just Yasser Qadhi, so it's not like we need to just single him out only because he's just an example of a greater problem. We have him, for example, going to a few months ago, going to one of these rabbis and calling these anti-Zionist Jews or religious Jews who are against Zionism, calling them they are the true followers of Moses. They're the true inheritors of Moses. No, they're not. The Muslims are. We are the true followers of Moses. We can applaud the the religious Jews if they want to oppose Zionism and they want to oppose the oppression that's going on. They can be applauded for that. We can say thank you very much. But we are not then going to turn around and say these are the true followers of Moses. No, the true followers of Musa alayhi salam are the true followers of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Those are the true. We are the true followers.
It's just that the timing also was so. The timing was so. It was at the time he put that lecture out. It was 100 years of the Khilafah, right? And it was trending everywhere. Google, here, YouTube, everywhere. The idea the Muslims, at least within the Muslim sphere, this was the main issue that was trending. And all of a sudden, for him to bring that lecture, and basically, it almost looked like somebody wanted him to do that.
He wanted to do it.
Well, he wanted to do it too, but I'm just trying to say, that is this. I mean, are these scholars?
They're not stupid. See, Sheikh, sorry to cut you, but for what I'm saying, right? Yasser Qadhi is not stupid. He's not an unintelligent person. He's not an idiot. So, of course, what he's doing, the fact that he went to that rally, why would he say that at that rally? Why would he do this lecture at this particular time?
That's the thing.
Exactly. It's calculated. It's calculated. There's no question about it. I mean, so these people, for all of their flaws, for all of their, dishonesty, hypocrisy, and so on, they're not stupid people. They're not. They're intelligent people, but they are calculated. Unfortunately, they are manipulating Muslims, and I mean, it's.
What do you think, Brother Daniel? What did you see and observe to have something out there in such a timing that the Muslims are looking for unity, Muslims are looking for Muslim leadership, and then for him to come out and said, in a time where Gaza is being completely desecrated, and so many other issues, in the month of Ramadan, at the timing of the 100th, anniversary of the loss of the Khilafah, and being a scholar of such a, whatever it is that the status that he's been given, to come out very specifically at this time and say this, what do you see happening? Like Brother, Jack and Brother Jack said, look, it's calculated stuff. This is not happening out of just whatever. It's very calculated work.
He's exposing himself, and I have over many years criticized Yasir Qadhi and exposed him as a reformist. He is a reformist. He believes in reforming Islam. He believes in, and he's made this very clear in many of his lectures. He even has called himself what he's calling for reform. He defends the word reform and reforming Islam. He posts on Facebook with these words, and I've covered it. I've tried to explain to people, warn them, like, look, he's not actual orthodox, conservative, religious scholar. He's a reformist in the same way that you would point to someone like Ilhan Omar as being a reformist, or you point to Tariq Ramadan. People know that Tariq Ramadan is a reformist. This is exactly what Yasir Qadhi is. When he's talking about Khilafah, this is also not new. Right now, he's emphasizing it at the most ridiculous time, but it's actually not new. He has made this kind of similar statement many times, that Khilafah, and even more extreme statements he has made. There was a panel discussion that he had on his channel, and it's still up. You can watch it, where he's discussing with a couple of others regarding this issue of political Islam and government and Khilafah. And he made the most outrageous claim that, I'm not a scholar, so I'm not going to say that it's kufr, but we need to have real scholars, who look at his statement and tell us his status. Definitely it's deviance. But you tell me, maybe this will shock you. He said that if that political Islam and the idea of Islamic governance and everything that entails, it is possible that wasn't actually the intended message of Islam, and that if the Quraysh in Mecca were more tolerant of the Muslims and accommodated the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba, accommodated them more and kind of had this more less hostile persecution of the Muslims, then there would be no need for hijrah. There would have been no need for the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba to make hijrah and go to Medina, and therefore there wouldn't be this idea of a Muslim state or a Muslim government. Muslims would just be a minority. The Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims would have been a minority in Mecca. There would be no concept of jihad. There would be no concept of conquest. There would be no concept of khilafah. He actually proposed this as a possibility. And the two other panelists, I think they didn't understand what he was saying, or they were shocked by it. But this is the kind of extreme reform and deviance that Yasir Qadhi is pushing out there. And these things come out, like his holes in the narrative, where he says that he was asked about the preservation of the Quran. Yeah. And he says, well, the Islamic belief that the Quran has been preserved, there are some holes in that narrative. And that statement of his went viral, and you had all of these Christian apologists picking up on it and saying, oh, see, one of the top Muslim scholars of the world is revealing that they hide the fact that their story about how the Quran has been preserved is actually not as solid or is not as accurate as they claim to be. They're just pretending in public, but in private, they know that it's a lie that the Quran has been preserved. So Yasir Qadhi, no one should have any doubt that he is a reformist, he is a deviant, and he just makes these statements as if we shouldn't be surprised anymore that he would make some kind of statement like this, or say that, Jews are the true followers, or anti-Zionist Jews are the true followers of Moses, etc. It's not. It shouldn't be shocking. This is who he is. Why won't we believe him when he tells us who he is?
Go ahead.
No, you should comment on this statement from Yasir Qadhi and what he's saying. His so-called proposal What do you think about that, Sheikh? About this would have never actually happened, would have never been part of Islam or our religious history if the Quraysh were just sat down and had some tea with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and accommodated him and everything. What do you think about this proposal?
This is very. I never knew that he went this far. I mean, I've heard him. I always looked at him as scholars for dollar type of thing. The guy just somebody's paying him. Maybe they're not. I don't know. But the kind of statements that he's making, it's obviously very. See, the thing is, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinukum. وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا." That's one. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَلْبِسُوا الْحَقَّ بِالْبَاطِلِ وَأَنْتُمْ تَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابَ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Then Allah said, ادخلوا في السلم كافة ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين. Then Allah Azza wa Jalla said, هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. Man, the ayat, وَلَنْ يَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ الْكَافِرِينَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ سَبِيلًا وَلَنْ تَرْضَ عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ غَيْرَ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَتَّخِذُوا يَهُودَ وَالنَّصَارَى أَوْلِيَاءَ. How many ways? Now, it's enough for one to hear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end, when He reveals this ayah, al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum, that this total thing had to happen in order for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to complete the guidance, so that now humanity has no excuse. And then the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Allahumma, and he bear witness. He raised his finger and he said, Oh Allah, I have conveyed my message, I have conveyed my message, I have conveyed my message. And so now for a scholar to come and say none of that would have happened if Quraysh did this and did that, I'm questioning his scholarship itself. Yani, again, I'm not a scholar who, I don't want, I'm just a student of knowledge, but to come and make takfir on anyone, I won't do that. That's not my place. But for someone like him to come out and say such nonsense regarding the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said Himself, Azza wa Jal, نحن نزلنا, وَنَحْنُ لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We are the ones, we revealed this Quran and we are the ones who are protecting it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how many different ways Allah Azza wa Jal says it's Allah that's protecting the Quran. And this was the way Quran was protected. This was the way the hadith were protected. So it's very interesting. That's why I always question these scholars to say, what, are you a scholar of Islam or are you a scholar of democracy and capitalism? If that's what you want it to be, or of secularism, then you should come out and say that, look, I'm a scholar of secularism, and then these are the kind of garbage that he's putting out. So, I've never taken anything from Yasir Qadhi, but it seems like every single time it gets ridiculous as time goes on. And so that's what I was saying, that look, these situations in the Muslim world, I think it's only exposing such scholars, and especially do it in these timings where the Muslims are looking for leadership, and he's coming and saying that there's no need for leadership. The other thing is the contradictions in the things he says in the same sentence. In the same lecture, he said, the Muslims are, they don't know what Sharia is, and they don't know what this is, and they don't know what that is, and now you're telling them that, we need Khilafah. So the question would be, do you want the people to know what the Sharia is? If that's what you're saying, that people don't know, okay, well, if the people should know the Sharia, how else are you going to implement the Sharia and teach the Sharia without the Khilafah? I mean, does he understand what Khilafah is? Or is he deliberately, putting out confusing statements to confuse the masses? So, I mean, there's so much to go. Go ahead.
Even non-Muslims understand the necessity of khilafah, even non-Muslims, because you're talking about, well, this is a very specific timing for Yasser Qadi to come out and speak out against khilafah. Even non-Muslims are saying in this time that look at what's happening to Philistine, what's the murder and genocide of Palestinians. Where is a strong Muslim state?
Yeah.
Where is a state that's going to come and protect the Palestinians and stop Israel from committing this genocide? This is what non-Muslims are saying. So let's forget about scholarship. You know, if anyone is deluded into thinking that Yasser Qadi is some scholar that we should respect, even non-Muslims are pointing out how big of a problem it is that there isn't a state, there isn't a khilafah, there isn't a Muslim country on the basis of Islam. You know, there are Muslim countries, of course, but a country that is established on the basis of Islam, a legitimate khilafah that can represent Muslims regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their nationality, regardless of their race, but just purely Muslims supporting each other, being united. This is something that is a necessity. And the whole idea that we can, oh, well, we have our religion, we pray Islam, we have our aqidah, we need to focus on aqidah, the basics. You know, why aren't Muslims praying? Like, many Muslims aren't praying and they don't know the basics of Islam. Let's focus on that, and then we'll worry about khilafah as number 20 on the list, or maybe really number 100 or 1000 on the list. This argument is also absolutely ridiculous and quite stupid, because if there is no political power, what guarantee is there that other powers in the world, the non-Muslim powers, are not going to wipe out Islam or distort Islam or change Islam? What force is there to oppose that? There is no force to oppose it in today's world. So even if they're not concerned with the Muslim blood, they're not concerned with the blood of Palestinians being shed, and they claim that they care about aqidah. Oh, that's the most important thing. Make sure you fix your aqidah. Even if their concern were aqidah, you still need a khilafah. You still need a state that will have leverage and be able to wield political influence, so that if Muslims in China are being oppressed, and Muslims in India are being oppressed, and Muslims in Africa are being oppressed, the Khilafah says, hey, stop oppressing your Muslim minority population, otherwise there'll be consequences. We don't have that kind of leverage. We don't have that kind of Muslim state that will speak in that way against these kinds of oppressions against Muslims. So this is, or France, for example, when France starts attacking Islam, and the president says, "Oh, it's your free speech right to insult the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam." Where is that power of Islam, an Islamic government to say, "Hey, France, you better not speak like this, otherwise there are going to be consequences for this type of hate or this type of attack on our deen." We don't have that. We have isolated Muslim countries, and they're represented by governments who, it's on the basis of nationalism, it's on the basis of ethnicity. So this is not sufficient.
I think, Sheikh, to be honest, I think a lot of these scholars who are speaking like this, when they say that, look, we have to focus on aqidah, we have to focus on salah, we have to focus on these things while all of this killing is going on. I asked one scholar, some scholars here in Chicago, they went as far as saying that, oh, if somebody would talk about Gaza, oh, just tell them to read Yasin 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and inshallah your du'as will be accepted. And this has happened, and I don't want to mention the names. You know some of these people very well. And the thing is that, so I asked the same scholars, I said, if a woman comes and asks you regarding a question regarding, let's say, period, let's say, right, Tahara, would you give her this answer and say, okay, if this is the issue you're going through, let's say if she asks you, can I test the Quran, can I read the Quran, or can I go to the Haram? Is it allowed to take maybe some medicine if I may have period at the time, if I'm in Umrah and things like this? Are you going to say to her, read Yasin 1,000 times? So why won't you give that answer? I said, oh, it's a laughable issue. But when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to what needs to be done in this situation, in this environment that we are in this genocide, killing of the Muslims, then you give Muslims in such a situation like this, you're giving Muslims and you're telling them read Yasin 1,000 times. I mean, look, Sheikh, the other thing is, I think we should address it someday, which is hiding the religion of Islam from the Muslims, hiding the books of Islam, hiding the real history of Islam and from the Muslims, and keeping the masses ignorant and keeping them just in a circle of, just pray Taraweeh, continue discussing whether it's 8 or 20, fight each other in the masajid over, this issues that have no effect, no relevance in real time. And what I mean by saying that, look, hiding sometimes the history, for instance, if you look at the history of Deoband, when sometimes if we discuss with the brothers and things like that, some of the scholars, some students of knowledge were here and we were just discussing, and someone was asking, what is, you're talking about these issues in the masajid, that what needs to be done. What do you think should be done, right? So I was saying that, look, if you are from the background of Deoband, and mashallah, Deoband has a huge history from Nanotwi Rahmatullah Alayh to, Anwar Shah Kashmiri to others, who all of this history of actually fighting the British, heck, even the formation of Deoband was done in order to protect the Muslims and to fight the British. You actually have a history more than any other school that can actually talk about how an occupation is removed. You have a whole history of it. 10,000, 20,000 scholars were killed during this time when they understood what the deen is and they were standing against the British occupation. But it's amazing how scholars from all backgrounds have tried to somehow, just kind of, just shove it under the carpet type of thing, this history. So what do you guys have to say about this, when you're looking at how scholars are playing this game of not accurately conveying the message of Islam to their own Muslim audiences, in their own masajid?
Well, I agree with you. I agree that they are bringing these ideas and it's very toxic for the masajid. And the way that we counter that is by speaking out. We have to continue to speak out against these kinds of deviances and deviations, that Khilafah is not a part of Islam. Just read Surah Yasin 1,000 times and that will be the solution. We should not have any political involvement. Like this kind of secularization or depoliticization of the ummah, it's very dangerous and it makes us weak and impotent. And that is what allows genocides to take place against Muslims that have been taking place over the past 200 years, 250 years. And the history of Deoband, as you mentioned correctly, is that this is a reaction to occupation, and it is an active effort to oppose the occupation and to rid the occupation, destroy the occupation. So where we need to have a counterpart to that, we need to benefit from that tradition, from that heritage, whether it's from Deoband or from other groups, for our situation today. So it's extremely relevant. This kind of quietist approach, we see it in different traditions, or different strands. You can say there is a Salafi type of quietist approach. These are the Madkhalis, basically. There is a Sufi side of it, quietist Sufi approach as well. And it's a big problem. It's a huge disaster. If you actually look at the Islamic tradition, there are some Sufis who were extremely active in fighting for the sake of Islam. They weren't just saying, oh, just read the Quran and do some dhikr and then all these problems are going to be solved. They're mujahideen, they're fighting. And same on the Athari side, the Athari Hanbali side, you also see a strong tradition of jihad and fighting for the sake of Islam. But now, because for the convenience of the dominant powers of the world, you have quietist reform interpretations that will bring up these arguments that, oh, Khilafah is not a part of Islam, it's not a priority, we shouldn't really strive for any kind of political dominance, or even as Islamic governance, like that shouldn't even be on the radar. Where does this idea come from? It comes from our enemies. It comes from the colonial powers that want to control and dominate Muslims. So that kind of physical domination has happened. Now there's a mental domination, a mental colonialism, and that is spread through these misguided scholars, these scholars who are spreading this false idea. So we have to counteract it.
Sheikh, also the dangers of, look, you have Qadianism, for instance. Qadianis came about. You had Ismailis, you have some whatever people came about, and their claim was that Islam is not complete. And so then they have now, they came and look, you had false prophets, Muslim al-Kazzab, and all of these things. And if a scholar goes as far as to say that, all of this that happened in Medina, the Medina phase of Islam would not have happened at all if Quraysh was to just accept, Muslims, and if they were more, let's say, merciful and things like this. Sheikh, this is, this kind of discussion actually leads to the idea that what was the reason for the sending of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? And think about what that means. I mean, if the whole idea of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending the messengers was to guide humanity and give them, and then especially the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as Khatimun Nabiyyin, the seed of the prophets, to complete way of life, to show as mercy to mankind, and then to say that this whole way of life was not needed because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not do anything out of no objective. It was very clear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the whole Medina was an example for mankind, for the Muslims, how Islam should be implemented. And if there is no Islam, what kind of work that is needed to be done in order to bring Islam. That's what makes Islam complete. Meaning, if there is no Islam, what do you do in order to bring Islam? And when there is Islam, how is Islam implemented? And preserved and taken to the rest of mankind. This is a very, subhanAllah, I mean, if you actually look at it, very precise method to show the Muslims and to the Muslim scholars what needs to be done if you are under Islamic law or if you're not under Islamic law. And so, his statements, it's very, that's what I'm saying. Sometimes I feel that the man is under pressure to say certain things in certain times in order to, misguide the Muslims while they're at one point, maybe right there, thinking of what needs to be done, and somebody's bought in order to basically remove that, that finally the Muslims are getting it. And so there's a danger that the West or the East feels that finally the Muslims may actually be getting the need for political unity. So you need to bring some scholars who will come and divert that, that energies to somewhere else. And the other thing also, man, if you look at, like, he constantly, while he says the Khilafah is not needed, then he's appearing in all these different things, talking about why we have to support Muslim causes. I mean, how is it that these scholars don't get that the amount of Muslim resources that are being wasted in these lands? And constantly we build or we rebuild and they're bombed. How many times has Gaza been bombed? How many times has it been rebuilt and then bombed? Whether it's Syria, whether it's all these places, Iraq completely finished. You have all of Sham burning. You have, Afghanistan and that whole area of Waziristan and all of these things. I am actually questioning their intellect. Do they not see the wastage of Muslim, resources, their energies, their minds, in actually, instead of actually building an infrastructure that will build a strong Muslim world, we are just continuing bandage the kind of violence that is put on us. And this is a discussion we were having last night. For instance, we were talking, me and Brother Jake and others were there, and we were talking how the Muslims are not even thinking about what to do to develop in many ways. Right? We're talking about, let's say, building think tanks and things like this. The constant pressure on the Muslims is, we are being bombed. We just have to make sure there is enough rice and sugar and flour in the minds of, that's all. That's all the discussion is. And it's kept that way. Constantly, our mindset and our understanding and all of our energies is just to raise money because we're being bombed, so that we can get some type of bandages and some type of, the hospital was built, is bombed. People were eating, they were bombed. School was running, bombed. Masjid was doing its services, bombed. And so that we never get away from this discussion to build ourselves. And then you have scholars who come and say, oh yeah, stay there. Stay there. That's the kind of discussion you keep having. Make dua, pray 20 rak'ah, and raise your hands and keep crying. And as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send angels to come down and bring this unity that we're looking for. Go ahead. I mean, I'm sorry I'm saying all these things. It's just I'm looking at the kind of, the kind of scholars that are being promoted and the direction that they're taking the Muslim youth in. And if this thing continues, it will be this kind of, we will be in chains for the next 100 years.
Yeah. I mean, just quickly, I think obviously one of the reasons they're doing it is because they're getting paid. They're getting money. If they weren't doing that and they weren't promoting these ideas and pushing them, and there was actual genuine unity under an Islamic government, right? Governance, they would be out of a job, Sheikh. What would they do? They because nobody would be listening to them anymore. How are they going to get paid? They'll just have to go, no disrespect to the imam, but they might just have to go sit in the mosque and just lead the daily prayers. That's the only thing they're going to do. They won't be invited to be speaking at these events, doing these videos. They would not be getting paid, right? And if you notice that, what kind of scholars are the Western governments supporting? These are the people they're supporting. Why? Because they're saying what they want them to say. Just think about who was actually one of the so-called scholars, without mentioning names, but people know, who's one of the scholars that was in the ear of George Bush, that was close to George Bush, that was speaking to him.
Oh, you can mention Hamza Yusuf.
Yeah, we know, right? We know Hamza Yusuf.
I mean,
so because Brother Daniel mentioned...
He did it live.
Yeah,
I mean,
but Brother Daniel mentioned we have, right, to be fair, it's not just one so-called group of scholars under one tradition. We have Yasser Qadi, who claimed to be Salafi. Now he calls himself post-Salafi or whatever he's claiming, coming from that. Then we have from the supposed Sufi side, Hamza Yusuf. But they're two sides of the same coin, Sheikh. These are the people that are being promoted by Western governments. They are their associates. They are receiving funding from them and support from them. Why? Because they're scratching each other's backs. So this is why they're promoting it, because they wouldn't have a job, or if they did, they'd be having a totally different job. They wouldn't be getting this kind of. You understand what I'm saying?
Even the idea that like every time, whenever there's a discussion going on regarding the Khilafah, or because people are tired of seeing what they're seeing on their screens, the idea of constantly, Mahdi is brought up. And I was asking the scholars the other day, I was saying that, look, why is it that anytime real questions about Muslim unity, really solving the problems, really sitting together to actually think about how to solve our problems, the only answer you give is Mahdi. And the thing what I realized, guys, brothers, wallahi, is that it seems that these scholars really don't have a solution. They don't know how to talk about it. they really don't know how to talk about Palestine situation. They really have never learned the deen in that way where they can actually think about Islam. Islam was never, the only thing that they learned is how to make nikah, how to talk about zakah, how to talk about zakatul fitr, how to talk about, Tarawih is 8 rakah or 20 rakah. But the real issues of the Muslims and the real political things that need to be done, this discussion has never happened and they don't know how to answer them. So to escape it, they always say, oh, Mahdi has to come, Mahdi. And they don't even explain that hadith regarding Mahdi. Meaning that, how do we take a hadith that is khabar? We're not denying him coming and things like this, but I'm just saying that, these are not the solutions that you give. If somebody wants to come and give zakah, you don't say, wait till the Mahdi come. How come you don't do that then? And the second, the other issues, brothers, you're talking about whether the Salafi school or the Athari and Ash'ari school, Salahuddin Ayyubi. You look at whatever we have gone through in the past. I was mentioning the Yoband, but if you look at Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullah, the way he fought, he stood against the Tatars. He was somebody who was poisoned in jail, killed in jail, and then the type of stance that he takes. You have Salahuddin Ayyubi, the type of stance that he takes. And it's not that we haven't been here in this situation before. We have been here. We were there when the Tatars came and destroyed the Muslim lands, and we were able to remove them, take them out, and bring back Islam. We were there when the Crusaders came to the Muslim lands, and we went again, we removed them, and we got back our Masjid al-Aqsa back in the hands of the Muslims. So the scholarship is there, but we don't see the scholars bring the text or the text at the time of those times from those scholars to discuss the matters that what needs to be done today. And this is the inaccuracies, this is the sometimes dishonesty that I am talking to the scholars about.
We shouldn't paint all the scholars with the same brush. I know you're not trying to do that, but just for people who are listening, we're not saying all scholars are like this. There are many scholars who they realize the problems and they are working towards real practical solutions. But I 100% agree with you. Like this kind of victim mentality, a victim mindset, that the most we can do is just complain that we are being victimized and we are being this and that, and who is going to help us? Why isn't the UN doing anything? Why isn't Biden doing anything? Like this kind of mindset. Like Muslims are being genocided by the tens of thousands in Palestine, and the only solution that you, the scholar or the da'i, can think of is, let's punish Biden by not voting for him in the elections coming up in November. Like that's the extent of your thought, because you're fully bought into this system.
That's the thing I was addressing, Sheikhi. Of course, not the scholars in general. Of course, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. There are people, ulama, there are, and they have been given darajat. There's no question. There's thousands rotting in the jails of the tyrants. We agree, and we know that. You're absolutely
right that there are these so-called scholars that they are imposters, and you mentioned talbisul haqqa bil batil. They are hiding the truth. They're not speaking the truth because it's politically incorrect, or they're worried about any kind of negative backlash or consequences. Maybe they're not going to have the same position that they have, but they know the truth, but they hide it. So we need to stop calling these people scholars when it becomes obvious on certain things, like they are speaking against Khilafah, they're speaking against Muslim political governance, etc. That we should not consider these people to be scholars or give them any authority. They're not brave enough. I kind of have some sympathy, little sympathy for a small imam somewhere who he might get fired and then he won't have a job if he speaks on certain issues. But some of these bigger names, they have this position, and it's a self-claimed position. They call themselves the chosen leaders of the community. They even view themselves as leaders of the Muslim community, and they put themselves out there, and they're raking in literally millions of dollars but they don't have the bravery to speak the truth. They don't have the bravery to say one thing that is going to be politically incorrect. The most that they can do is they can cry, oh, Palestinians are being killed. Why we need to stop voting for Biden, and we need to not actually. Who knows? In November, Allahu Alam, they might change their tune and say, yeah, Trump is really bad. We should vote for Biden, even though he was part of this genocide. They're probably going to change their tune in November and start supporting the Democrats again. But in the meantime, all they can do is follow the non-Muslims. They can follow the Democrats. Imagine if in the U.S. you didn't have any kind of pro-Palestine movement from secularists. It's a question even if these imams would speak out for Palestine.
Yes, that's the trend. Look, here's the thing. It seems to be a trend, and it's actually looked at. When we talk about Palestine in general, even amongst the non-Muslims, it's a trend to be the activist. To wear that kufiya and to put on the Palestinian flag, and it's a thing that we've seen in general, very much supported and things like that. But if it wasn't that trend and it wasn't that kind of, let's say, support, only Allah knows what would have come out of their mouth. Allahu Alam, what kind of blame games they would actually put on there. But look, because this is not the only time. I mean, Bosnia happened. Uyghur Muslims are suffering the way they're suffering. Rohingya Muslims are suffering the way they're suffering. Afghanistan. I mean, what didn't happen? You're talking since, let's say, 100 years, almost, supposedly some numbers I was looking at, I don't know how accurate they are, but almost 22 million Muslims killed in the last 100 years. Yeah, in so many different wars that have occurred on the Muslims, and they're happening, right? So this is these are discussions. I'm actually glad that these discussions it's happening amongst the Muslim, inshallah, and Muslim intelligentsia, and that we are putting it out there, saying that look, we need to raise the bar of the discussion. It cannot just be charity. Look, we are out there. I mean, Islamic Oasis is well known. We are there working in different parts of the world, helping, supporting. But every single time, whenever I discuss these issues, even to the Muslims, even if you're doing fundraising, I always remind the Muslims that, look, we need to think of the solutions that Allah has given us instead of the constant, bandage work that we are doing. How many bandages are you going to put? How many? At one point, you're not going to have enough bandages even. So it really is high time that the ulama need to be, those who are speaking the haqq need to be supported. Brothers like you guys, mashallah, there are out there and are constantly in the face of battle, need to be supported, need to be given that support so that you can keep your voices high. Inshallah Rabbil Alameen.
I have, I don't know if it's okay, this last question actually, because I want to see what Daniel thinks. What do you think about this concept of Jewishness as a race? We see Ethiopian Jews and Jews from Russia or Arab Jews. This concept of Judaism and Jewishness as something distinct, not just as a religion, a follower of supposed Judaism, but a race. And I'm wondering, what exactly is this race? Because when we look at an Ethiopian Jew, we look at a Russian Jew, I mean, maybe it's me. I am colorblind, so to be fair, maybe I'm missing something. But these people don't seem to be very closely related genetically. I'm just saying that's what I'm seeing, and this whole idea of the right of return, right, for so-called Israel. It seems to me that part of pushing this idea of Jewishness as a race is for that. Oh yeah, Jewishness can be considered a race, so we can bring in these people from over here and these people from over here, and all to obviously ethnically cleanse and populate so-called Israel with what they consider their people. So I just was wondering your thoughts on that, Daniel. What do you make of this concept of Jewishness as a race, and how it maybe relates to this idea of the right of return for so-called Jews?
I do think there is a biological component,
Mhm.
just because that is part of their religion. So when we say that something is biological, that is how they define Jewishness, even way before Zionism was around. That it's a matrilineal descent. If your mom is Jewish, then you are considered a Jew. And if your mom and dad are Jewish, then you're considered a Jew. Like they have an entire, like, so many of their what you can call fiqh, or like their jurisprudence, is based off of this kind of biological lineage. In a way that Islam is not like that, Christianity is not like that, Buddhism is not like that so much. But you can say that in modern Buddhism there is an ethnic component. So I think the fact that Ethiopian Jews exist, for example, or Arab Jews, you can have mixed race people. You know, like my children are half Persian and half Arab. Would we call them like Persianized Arabs or Arabized Persians? Like they're a mix, right? But we wouldn't deny that there's two separate ethnicities of Persian and Arab,
Mhm.
or even black and white. You know, you can have mixed race, and you say, oh, you wouldn't say that this is an Africanized European or a Europeanized African, right? But they're mixed race. But those races, I mean, I do think that they exist, and you know that's part of the creation of Allah. But the whole idea of race is it's something biological, like it's based off of descent, and it's proven by genetics, basically. Like you can analyze someone's genetic code and and actually be able to tell 500 years ago this is where your ancestors lived, like in this part of the world. So that kind of analysis is an objective science, and people do DNA tests all the time, like 23andMe and these kinds of DNA, and they'll tell you like, okay, you have 10% Ashkenazi Jew, like in your DNA. It shows up. You have 25% Turkish. You have 10% Germanic, or Anglo. They can do that. How are they able to pick out? Because they've defined it. They've obviously, you can say that the definition of what is an Anglo, like this particular genetic sequence, or what is Ashkenazi Jew, this particular genetic sequence. Obviously, the labels are man-made, but there are these genetic distinctions that you can find in people's DNA. So yeah, that's what I think about it. Now, is it being used to the advantage of Zionist? A Zionist program or Zionist agenda? Yeah, of course it is. But I don't think it takes away from the fact that there is a racial component or a biological. If you're uncomfortable with the term, you can say a biological component, and it's coming from the religious teachings itself. Like there are rules, like you can't marry outside of the Jewish race. There's severe punishments. So your children are going to have a certain amount of descent, and a lot of the rules of Judaism are based on being Jewish, like biologically, not because you testify to a certain creed. And that's a big difference between Islam and Judaism, that it's really being part of their group, like being part of the Ummah, the Muslim Ummah, requires you have certain beliefs. You have to believe in Allah, you have to believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the final prophet. But they don't have that. Like you can be an atheist Jew and you're accepted as a Jew, and the laws of Judaism apply to you on the basis of like their fiqh, their analog to fiqh applies on the basis of your lineage, not that you testify a certain beliefs. Like you can disbelieve in God entirely, disbelieve in the Bible entirely, and those you're still counted as a Jew according to their law. in Islam, obviously, if you're a Muslim, that has certain requirements, and you're legally treated differently on the basis of what you profess in terms of your belief. So it's estimated that about 50% of Jews don't actually believe in God. They're atheist or agnostic. And I was, again, talking to a religious Jew the other day who was coming from a Hasidic background, and he said that even amongst Orthodox religious Jews, probably, over 50% don't even believe in God. And they're Orthodox. They're going to the synagogue. They're doing, they're abiding by the laws, but they don't even believe in God. Like that's something that doesn't really make sense to Muslims. Like, why would you pray and fast and do and abide by these rituals, but really you don't believe in God? And he was trying to explain to me, like, well, that's how Judaism is. It's more important for you to go through the motions and follow the law. Your belief, if you don't have the belief, it's like a sin. You don't believe in God and you believe in like Satan instead, or you don't believe in anything, then that's like a sin, but you're still a Jew, and you're still able to like do the prayers and do these different actions and abide, not eat pork, for example. So it's a completely different idea of religion.
Yeah, but I see some anyway. So we made a big to do about so-called Muslim scholars, but some Jewish scholars or some people presenting themselves as rabbis seem to disagree with that narrative. I mean, you see them on these programs, and they'll even call Zionist Jews or people who actually claim to be religious and Orthodox because they're Zionists. They'll say, "Oh, these people are not actually real Jews," and then they'll say the same thing about the secular Jews, whether they're Zionist or not. So I'm not saying that they're correct or not correct, but it seems that there is difference in the Jewish community, that some Jews do take the aspect of belief seriously. And if you don't actually believe in the key tenets of Judaism, then you're not a Jew. It doesn't matter if your mother and your father are Jews or were even practicing Jews. If you don't even believe in God, or even if you claim to believe in God and you're a supporter of the Zionist state, they would say that you're not actually a Jew. So I have seen rabbis saying that as well, but I mean, I guess you would disagree with their assessment of traditional Jewish teachings.
I was wondering.
I would like to know who they are, because I'd like to see what they're saying. That's interesting to me. I would also say that they would be in the minority. Like, this would be like a minority or even deviant position within Judaism. But rabbinic Judaism, as far as I've studied it, considers being a Jew a biological thing.
The thing is, I was just reading this. There's a book called The 13th Tribe. Maybe, I'm sure some of you have read it. First of all, the idea that, the bloodline for the Jews comes from the mother. It's very interesting. It seems that Judaism, it has always, it has a history of the struggle. For instance, the idea that the Judaism comes from mother's bloodline. This kind of became more emphasized during the time of the 40 years that they were in exile, and so they, at least from what I was reading, it seemed that there were not enough men, and then due to this situation that the Jews were in this 40 years, it wasn't by law that the Jewish line comes from the mother. Rather, it was by necessity of the situation that they were in that it became like that. That, okay, look, it's going to be the mother that's going to define whether you're a Jew or not. And the second thing, at least from the book what I was reading, is that, and it's a Jewish person who wrote it's a Jewish author who wrote the book, was saying that, look, in reality, when you talk about culture and things like that, the Jews don't really have they've never been a Jewish culture. You can't really accurately say anywhere that this has been historically the Jewish culture. I mean, if the Jews were in Spain, then they kind of adopted, mixed with the Muslims, mixed with whatever that was happening, and they put together a culture. Whether they were in Europe, they put together a culture, because the actual books, actual resources that were needed in order to say that this is the tradition of what we have. We can go back all the way to the Prophet ﷺ, to the Sahaba, that type of culture, to say this is the pure Jewish culture, doesn't exist. To the point, he went on to say that the only way that we can maybe now put together a Jewish culture, which is in the state of Israel. And what he said was that, look, even the state of Israel, or Israel, is really an idea that was put together by the, of course, Herzl and things like that. But traditionally, at least, they can't really prove those things. The state of Israel comes into existence by partition that was created by the British Mandate. So then he says, look, now we've been kind of given this, so now let's bring the Jews and build a culture from this state that we have built. So, just I was looking at, what you guys were discussing, to say that, is it even accurate to say that the Jews actually have a real culture that has been preserved? Just because the amount of, the war of Nebuchadnezzar, what the Romans did, later on what the Syrians did, and all of that, never seems that the actual culture of the Jews has been preserved, to go back and say this is the way of our tradition or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't think any academic is going to say that the culture of the Jewish race or the Jewish people has been preserved since the time of Moses. According to academic studies, they can't even independently verify that Moses exists, like Moses was an actual historical person. Obviously, as Muslims, we know that Musa alayhi salam was a great prophet, one of the greatest prophets. So we believe in Moses, but it's on the basis of the Quran and what the Prophet ﷺ has told us. But is there independent verification that Moses existed in the past? Currently, no. There is independent verification that the Prophet ﷺ existed, because there's archaeological evidence, there's also manuscript evidence that shows that independent non-Muslims recognize, oh, there is a prophet in Arabia, his name is Muhammad ﷺ. So there is the historical academics, non-Muslim academics, they will agree that, okay, the Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad existed, his religion that he taught is like this, his book that he taught is this, the Quran, because there's manuscript dating, radiocarbon dating that can place the Mus'haf, the Quran that we have and we recite, is found in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But you can't do the same exercise with Moses. So there is no academic who would say, yeah, we can trace not only the culture but the theology of Jews today back to even the 6th century BC, or even the 1st century CE. That this is not academically verified. Jews might claim that, but these are just religious claims that they have without any kind of independent backing.
No. So inshallah, here we'll end it. It's been hours, I think 10 minutes. Inshallah, we have a lot more to do. Today is obviously still we're fasting. So Jazakallah khair, Brother Daniel, for your time, and keep us in your du'as while you're fasting. And inshallah, these are we're in the last 10 days. We're going through the nights of Laylatul Qadr. Every day, these moments are these are moments that we need as an ummah to keep us in your dua. And Brother Jake is spending a lot of time with us. Mashallah, tabarakallah, jazakallah khair. He actually is here for the 10 days, and he's got a lot of work to do. Inshallah, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Jazakallah khair for your time, ya Sheikh. Barak feek. Inshallah, we'll see you guys next time, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect and preserve this ummah. Allahumma a'izz al-Islam wal-Muslimin, dhill al-shirka wal-mushrikin, wa dammir a'da' ad-din ya Rabbil Alameen. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show us the day where Muslims of Gaza and Palestine are free and together praying inside Masjid al-Aqsa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
لا لن يطول الظلام، ديننا لن يضام، نحن جيل همام، نحن فينا عمر. لا 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 لن يطول الظلام، ديننا لن يضام، نحن جيل همام، نحن فينا عمر.
صبح بدا نور ظهر، نجم وشمس وقمر، ألقى على الدنيا الدرر. هذا عمر، هذا عمر، كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من العبر. هذا عمر، هذا عمر.
لا لن تدوم الجراح، بل سيأتي الصباح، نحن أهل الكفاح، نحن فينا عمر.